Welcome to How's Your ePresence? I am Mark Galvin, your host, and this show is brought to you by ePresence. We're so glad to be with you today. This show is where we help you, the business person, try to do something better on digital marketing. Learn something new, find out something you didn't know before. Heck, maybe go into something that you think you're an expert at and tell you something new. And today we are not going to shy away from that mission at all. We're going to talk about podcasts today. So stick around. I think you'll like this. We have had it's been an interesting period of time right now going on in the world. We're looking at the stock market's going up, it's going down, it's going up, it's going down. Actually, it's going mostly down. And so from my wife's perspective, she's actually in the financial space. She would say, just sit tight. It's going to come back. So that's what we want you to do. Sit tight. Don't worry about your stocks, your 401k. Just sit back and enjoy this show because we're going to share some great stuff with you today. We have a great YouTube channel. If you're ever interested in seeing what else we've talked about, go check that out. You can easily find it. It's How's Your ePresence? Actually, it's YouTube. Let's see if I can do this from memory. YouTube.com/ePresenceME. You can find that channel or just search for ePresence. You'll be able to track that down. Wherever you are, whatever place you're watching this show, we'd love for you to subscribe. If you subscribe, you get notified when we go live, which lets you show up and ask our guests your questions. Why do you want to depend on me? Don't let me figure out the questions. You should figure out those questions that you want our guests to answer. The subscription allows you to do that. And great highlight, make sure you ask questions. So if you're tuning in on whatever platform you are, throw your questions right in the box. If you want, even just say where you're from. We'll share that with everybody. We'd love to let everybody know how big our audience is. So the topics today are, we're going to talk about podcasting. We're going to do a deep dive at podcasting because we've got an expert on that. Should you do podcasting? Is it a great thing to do? What are the challenges if you're in podcasting? I think if some of you may already do a few of your own shows, how can you make those better? Something else is, how do you pick the right format? And if you're curious on what the format means, stick around. We'll get into that. So who's our guest today? Our guest is Roger Nairn with Jar Audio. I said this to him. I said, is it JAR or is it JAR? It's JAR Audio. He's the co-founder and CEO of that agency, and they were one of the world's largest podcast production agencies. And for some reason, my mouth isn't working well. So we're going to practice that a little bit more and get a little better at it. Roger has worked at Netflix, Expedia, Walmart, Nordstrom, it's not plural, Lamborghini, Cineplex, Seasons Plus, and lululemon. Hey, Roger, when you come on, tell me, does lululemon start with a capital L or a lowercase l? That's interesting branding. You're also, or has been, or currently is, a board member for TEDx in Vancouver. So you're going to want to stick around and listen to these great stuff, these nuggets that Roger's going to share with us. So just a reminder, wherever you are, ask a question. Throw your questions right onto the screen or right on into the chat box wherever you are, and we will put that on our screen, or even just share where you're joining us from. Well, I think that's enough of that intro. Let's see if we can find Roger out there. There he is. Roger, welcome. How are you, sir?
Doing fantastic, Mark. Thanks so much for having me.
You bet.
To answer your question, it is a lowercase L.
It is.
It's always a lowercase L. And the reason I know is because Lululemon's head office is literally a 5-minute walk from where I live. And I have been around that brand since it started, which started actually about a block and a half up the street.
Why lowercase? You think there's a purpose?
Brand purpose? Yeah, I mean, I think it's, if you were to ask them, they would probably say they don't want to be too capitalistic. Sorry, I'm thinking of the capital letter, but honestly, I'm probably not that far away. It's a
their stuff is expensive.
It's very expensive,
right? And so if they don't like capitalism, they've done a very good job of managing their pricing than anybody. I mean, I have never seen such a light, know nothing fabric cost $250 in my life. I'm astounded at that. Right. They do a good job.
Yeah, and they got a great following and community, and they're not afraid to charge.
Yeah. Well, people are willing to pay it. And that's part of the beauty of it.
Yeah,
They're yeah. So you've got children, right? You've got a
Mhm.
youngin.
Yeah, he just turned 4. He's
Wow, that's so cool.
he's just turned 4. He definitely has an opinion on everything, and
Does he like Lululemon?
he does actually. He
Oh my
I think
gosh.
I know, but
You're
honestly,
in trouble.
it's right down the street, so we're just enveloped
Couldn't
by
help
it.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So I have 3 kids, a son and 2 daughters, and in that order. I said that in order because he's the oldest and the girls are behind him. That was obvious, right? He's 25, and then I have a 22-year-old, and then an 18, almost 19-year-old. And the girls love Lululemon, and he does too. I mean, he's a runner, and it's amazing to me how the lengths they'll go to get something that has that name on it. But that's
Totally.
the beauty of branding. That's the beauty of building a great product.
Absolutely.
You want that to happen. All right, great sidebar conversation, but I want to ask you my favorite question I ask everybody. So, what do you do, and why do you do it?
So I'm the co-founder and CEO of Jar Audio. So as you mentioned, Jar Audio is one of the largest podcast production agencies in the world. We only make podcasts exclusively with brands, companies, and organizations. Why do I do it? I came from the advertising world. So you had mentioned all these different companies. I didn't actually work I didn't work for them. I wasn't an employee, but I did represent them on behalf of my agency. So came from DDB and Cossette and big agencies, global agencies. And I just love the marketing world. Somebody once described it to me as the sort of rock and roll side of the business world, which always fascinated me, and always it's what got me in the first place. But then I fell in love with podcasts. I fell in love with listening to podcasts, and then eventually got into it as a hobby. I was using it as an excuse to meet some really incredible, prolific people. So I use that as my way to have an excuse to reach out to the likes of, Seth Godin and Stefan Sagmeister. And I got to interview some really fascinating individuals. And then eventually, met a couple partners of mine, and we played around with the idea of starting a podcast production agency. We felt like that was just an underserved part of the podcast world. It was about 5 years ago. We started building it off the side of our desks, slowly. And we're now at the point where we have 18 full-time staff, 47 contractors, and about 20 podcasts in production as we speak.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are you all of you pretty much all based in Canada, or are you across North America, or more even?
Yeah, we're in the more category. So, the leadership team is based in Vancouver, in Canada. However, we have teammates all around North America, everywhere from Boston to Miami to Los Angeles, upwards towards Montreal, Toronto. And then we also have partnerships with different pros in Europe. And we've just started creating some relationships in some of the Latinx markets as well. So yeah, we have a presence pretty much everywhere.
That's terrific. Where are you in Canada?
So I'm in Vancouver, British Columbia. So that's just north of Seattle. It's about a 2.5-hour drive from Seattle. We live right on the coast here. I live in a little town called Kitsilano, which is where Lululemon was started by Chip Wilson many years ago.
Yep.
And then it gives us a good jumping off point to head across the world wherever we need to be. I just got back from Montreal yesterday. We hired a bunch of amazing folks during the pandemic that I had never seen in person yet, and it felt like the right time to finally see them. So I flew a few folks into Montreal, and we got a chance to break bread and give each other a hug and a high five, and it was awesome to just see people in person again. Yeah.
That is so cool. So I'm just gonna tell you that Vancouver is my favorite city.
Oh, great.
And I have been to Europe. I have seen a lot of places. I did a lot of traveling in the hotel business.
Oh, cool.
And Vancouver is my favorite city for two easy reasons, and I could probably list 20. Actually, I could probably list more than that. But the number one is it's beautiful. And there are a lot of cities that have a bay.
Yep.
your bay is smaller, but
Mm-hmm.
on the other side of the bay is not just a mountain, it is a huge mountain, right? So you've
Mm-hmm.
got this city that's by the bay, and then boom, these absolutely gorgeous mountains.
Yeah, and there's this little pocket in the year where you can legitimately be, windsurfing or out on the water, and then if you want to, you can head up to the mountain and get in a little bit of spring skiing. It's not unheard of
That
at
is
all.
unbelievable. I think that's just so cool. So the beauty is absolutely terrific, but I like the size of the city. This is
Mm,
not a massive, this is not a massive metropolitan area that's going to take you a gazillion years or hours to get
yeah,
across it. It is small, it's compact, and it's really just beautiful. The third reason are the people. The
oh,
people in
thank you,
Vancouver are absolutely fantastic. Some of the
thank you,
nicest people I've ever met. If you haven't been to Vancouver, put it on your list. It
for sure.
is absolutely terrific. And you go see Victoria right around the corner
Yeah,
when you get up there, and then go into the mountains to spend a
go up
weekend
to
or
Whistler.
two in the mountains. Oh
Yeah,
my
I mean,
God,
we
it's
just we just
gorgeous.
ho- we hosted the Olympics in 2010, and
Yeah,
I
that's
think it
right.
gave everyone a really good glimpse into what we have to offer here. And if anyone is a fisherman, they love to fish, we have the best fishing in the world. And here's a little secret that I'm constantly surprised. More. I'm going to assume a lot of your audience is from the United States. Guys, the U.S. to Canadian dollar difference, it's an immediate discount for you.
Well, yes, yes,
And
it
I
is.
mean, to just that alone is just a great
Good reason to come.
reason to come. Exactly. And then, go up to the fishing lodges or find a guide. It's just phenomenal.
Something that a lot of people feel like, that I always thought, is that Canada's just cold. Well, because of you being on the Pacific, it also makes the city warmer.
Hmm.
It's terrific. So anyway, all right, we can go on and
Yeah.
on. We're not here to talk about Vancouver, although we didn't put that together in our pre-show interviews. Gosh, I just love that city. There is another reason I think Vancouver's great. Your women are beautiful,
Oh yeah.
but that's a whole.
Yeah.
When I was there the first time, I was 21, 22,
Oh, danger.
single, and so I was astounded at the beautiful. I mean, everybody's beautiful.
Yeah,
I just thought the women were beautiful too. All right, let's get into some podcast stuff here.
for sure.
I wanted you to put us under the microscope, right? So here we are, we're running a podcast. This is part
Mhm.
of our gig. We're trying to grow our brand and get people to understand who we are. I like the podcast format because it helps me meet people like you were
Mhm.
talking about.
Mhm.
We have a few partners that I have met from shows like this. With that said, tell me what you think. You've been through our show so far. What can we do better at How's Your Represence? I'm really curious. And
Well,
don't be kind.
first of all, I'd say that the actual brand presence is fantastic. There's clear recognition of who owns the podcast and what's coming from it. Okay, so if I was going to be a stickler,
Yeah.
I think just off the top of the interview, maybe providing a little bit more context as to like what the listener should be expecting and what they can
Mm.
gain from the interview. What are the takeaways? Which is, I know, tough because we haven't conducted the interview yet. But I know you mentioned a few things about digging into podcasts and talking about different formats, which is great. But like, as a listener, what's the value I'm going to get out of the episode?
Now, so this is something interesting, and you
Mm.
and I both have seen this. There are some shows that will do the introduction after the interview.
Which is something we'll
So,
do. So yeah, we'll do
yeah,
what we call pickups, where we'll do all the sort of the business bits after the recording has been conducted. We will have done a pre-interview with the guest, which we did a
yep,
couple weeks ago, actually. And so the interview will be really based on sort of digging into the meat of the conversation, and then any of the business stuff we'll do at the very end. But I understand also it's a live show, it's on Vidyard, so there's that angle, which I totally get.
right, right, good.
Mhm.
Okay, so what else?
Okay. I think there's a lot of links that are included in emails and stuff like that. And I think that can sometimes
Hmm.
get a little bit cumbersome, but
Yeah,
at the end of the day, I found what I needed to click on and I was here on time. And um,
good.
I think also just, um, uh, we had spoken about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think, which was a great conversation. I think, that was maybe a little bit too far away, because there's a lot that I could have forgotten, or
Right.
you did remind me of the conversation, so that was great to read, but maybe a little bit of a tighter distance between those two calls would be awesome.
Good.
So things are a little bit more fresh. But other than that, no, we're off to a good start.
So, and I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but
I should add that it is increasingly rare for a podcast host to do a pre-interview. So I think that the fact you did one is awesome. We do them all the time, but it's not for everyone.
Yeah, I'll tell you the reason I do it is I can't tell you how many times I've shown up. Well, this was a while ago. I had the unfortunate experience of landing on a podcast that had been booked. We had a PR group reach out to us, which is happening more and more often. People are finding us. We don't have to go find them, which is really nice. If you do it long enough, people do start coming out of the woodwork to be on your show. Mm-hmm. And we got on the show and we started talking, and it was like pulling teeth. It was horrible, right? Yeah. Not only could the person not communicate well, yeah, it was such a challenge, and so it hurt our own brand. It was running live, so it's not like I could say, "Okay, we're just not going to run that episode." Mm-hmm. That was an issue. So I like to hear that the potential guest, can be articulate, can speak well enough that our audience will say, yes, I'm going to listen. Because for all of you watching out there, the video, so we stream this live. That's great. Truth is, people are more concerned about sound than they are about video. So if your guest can't talk well, you're going to have more challenges than if you have bad video. So for sure, all of those things come into play.
And also, talking in advance gives you a good idea of where the veins are that are worth exploring in the conversation, and it's preparation. You're coming into the conversation with a plan versus winging it. Because trust me, I'm getting quite tired of those podcasts where it's clear that the host has no idea who I am, or any guest for that matter. It's very clear that there is like a set list of questions that they ask every single guest, and it's kind of like there's no real rhyme or reason as to why. And don't get me wrong, like, your listeners appreciate a certain level of familiarity, but I also don't think that they expect you to like tick all the boxes. Right. Why didn't he ask that question? Because he always asks that question. It's like, well, yeah, but it's more important to have a fluid conversation, and
it absolutely is, and it's a lot more engaging. So if there's an interesting guest and we're having a conversation about what I think is interesting, it's because I'm a business owner and I'm trying to tease out those things that I think I would want to know. Well, actually, it is what I want to know. And let's be honest, there are a lot of people that do interviews that just throw out those questions, and frankly, it's boring.
Yeah.
So
well, and I get the feeling that it's like, yes, it's for sure boring for the guests, but also like it doesn't seem like they're really into it themselves. It's almost like they're like, okay, I got content, I'm just going to quickly ask these questions, and then I've got my next episode to throw up live. And it just feels like it's just going through the motions versus having a real engaging conversation. Because at the end of the day, the host job is not to be, sort of the presence of the podcast. It's to channel the listener and be the voice on behalf of the listener. It's you're here for them, not for ticking boxes.
That's terrific. I think that the value, and this is great conversation, because we're talking podcasts here. And for those of you that have just tuned in, we're talking to Roger Nairn of Jar Audio. He is a podcast expert. One of the values that I want you, my guest, to take away from this show is it be valuable enough for you to drop on your website, to drop on your social media, to say, hey, or even to talk to a client and say, you want to know what we do? Go check out this video. Will show you. And a lot of our guests are not podcast experts, right? Most of them are in the SEO world. They're email marketers and so on. And it helps. It's helpful for them to have this as marketing material. There's an interesting thing that has happened, I think, over the last 5 years, definitely the last 5 years, and that is a lot of people say, "Gosh, I should have my own podcast." Why? Why are people saying that? In your opinion, if I'm sitting as a business owner, why the heck would I want to start my own podcast? What do you think people think the ROI is? And is that ROI actually happening for them?
Well, I think they think the ROI is a massive Joe Rogan type audience, and I will be the first to tell you that that's not going to happen.
If you build it, they will come.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
shouldn't say it's not going to happen. I just it's not. Some of those bigger shows, This American Life, Radio Lab, Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss, like those have a lot of ad dollars behind them as well. Plus, they have a network of other podcasts that probably own them that they're tapping into and cross promoting with one another. So,
Yep.
For sure, we want to look at an audience size as one of the key metrics that we're going to track. But for us, is actually it's all about that level of engagement. And so, when we look at a podcast, we look at the consumption rate, how long are people listening for, where are they skipping, where are they dropping off, are they dropping off, are they skipping? And our shows see upwards of 95 to 98% completion rates, which we're super, super proud of. And as marketers, because let's be honest, when we're talking about a brand and a podcast, it is a marketing medium.
Right.
It can't be an ad. Nobody's going to listen to an ad, especially a 30-minute ad. But it's it's a good piece of content marketing if it's done properly. And so when we look at the key metrics and what we're tracking, it's things like the engagement rate. We're also looking at and there's new tech that we can apply to the podcast file that connects with your website to determine who's listening to the show and then ending up on your site, or perhaps converting through the download of a form or a purchase even. So there's a number of those sort of metrics that we follow as well. I say it with each of our clients when it comes to sort of what is the ROI. It really depends on what's important to the brand. And I'll give you a perfect example is one of our projects was with Expedia. We did a podcast with them for 3 years called Out Travel the System. It was all about how to get the most out of your travel experience. It wasn't an ad for Expedia. It just happened to be brought to you by Expedia. And it included some Expedia experts here and there, because let's be honest, there's very few travel brands as prolific and data driven and everywhere as Expedia.
Right.
And
they are their own strong brand without a doubt.
For sure. Yeah. And so when they came to us, they said, we have a brand challenge. And that is that not enough people see us as a helpful brand. So to us, we're going to track the level of sort of helpfulness through a bunch of, kind of brand surveys throughout the year. We'll pulse them. And we'll determine whether those that have listened to the podcast feel like we're a more helpful brand. So to them, that was the ROI. Is this brand dial being turned up and down in certain areas? And then another brand is going to be completely different. They're going to have a different reason for it. And so I would encourage listeners to just really kind of focus on what is right for you and your company versus sort of the vanity metrics of the industry.
Right. Well, and I think you just really hit it on the head, and that is that you've got to know what your goal is. I mean, this sounds silly, and it doesn't sound silly. It sounds rote, but it's worth saying. And the reason I think it's always worth saying is because you can't think about this enough.
Mm-hmm.
What is the goal? And if you're working towards a goal and you're not reaching your goal, whatever that may be, it doesn't mean that you should shut down the podcast. It means that maybe you're trying to achieve the wrong thing. And I have a 100% personal example. So here we are looking at how's your e-presence, and we're wondering how we can make this show achieve more, where we're getting more. We'd like to get more clients. So everybody would like more business. So we're thinking, how can we leverage this show and the show's format? And now we've got some history because the show's been going for over 3 years.
Nice.
I think it's 4 years, but how can we do that? And one of the things that we decided just this week is if we can give more value back to our listeners, we may be able to yield more leads. And so what we've decided to do, and I'd love to get your opinion on this. So this is real time, no joke. This just came up in a conversation yesterday, is we're going to convert the show into, let's bring on someone who has a website, or let's bring on somebody who's got social media up and running, and let's do an audit. Let's do a show where we go through their stuff and we give live real-time advice on, you should try this. I would try this. Let's look at this. Oh, that works well. This is a good idea. Change it to that, where we're expressing our expertise in real time for people who would like the feedback, right? What do you think about that? And do you think that that's a good way to try to get more leads out of our show?
I do. I think that's a great idea, because it's real. It showcases your way of operating, and it gives listeners or viewers a good glimpse into what it would be like working with you. But it's also full of value, because there's probably a lot of people watching or listening that are similar in size to whatever, company you're speaking with, and would probably be, writing notes as they go, trying to determine whether they're making some of the same errors, or, kind of leveraging some of the same tools and opportunities that whoever it is that you're auditing has. No, I think for sure. I think the one thing I would caution against, though, is make it as much about them and the the audit, and less about the e-presence side of it, because then it could come across as a bit addy, right? The listener should really feel like you're bringing them this great content. You obviously have a strong point of view on the best way of going about this audit, and but they're going to find it will become increasingly clear to them that it's coming from you and your company. It doesn't need to be hit over the head too much.
Yeah, I think that it's the type of content that just speaks for itself, and that's
for sure.
And that's the sort of thing. So Lisa Cutter is our director of marketing, and she is an expert on the Facebook and Instagram side, and I specialize in LinkedIn. And both of us have done training. And during training programs, if you've done a great job, you get lots of questions at the end. And so these rapid fire questions are probably the most productive part of the training.
Right.
And that's where we thought, let's do this and see if that helps, because it's just giving value. There is no,
for sure.
I don't need to say anything about e-presence, because it's on the screen, and it's, if somebody tunes in and they're watching, they're going to see that, hey, this is an e-presence helpful. And here's something else. I didn't want to rebrand it. How's your e-presence still works, because we're talking about how you can improve your e-presence. So
I can even see you branding sort of, each of those as like a certain sort of almost like sub brand of the podcast, like how's your e-presence audit edition, or so the listener can also specifically zero in on I want to see all those audits, and kind of parse it out that way.
Oh, that's cool. Oh, I love that.
I will say that the biggest thing that I think isn't being leveraged enough from a company standpoint when they're producing podcasts is podcast owners get very caught up in the next episode, but they're forgetting all this great content that they have already released, but isn't being utilized. So I always encourage everyone to reshare old episodes, bubble up some of those best of bits and pieces and put it into like kind of a mid-season best of episode, or like cut up and chop up the episode into little snackable pieces that you share on social. Like there's nothing that because I mean a lot of the content is evergreen, and it's great to kind of utilize at any point. It has nothing to do with the timeliness of it. I mean, some will, because you're talking about a certain topic that's in the news or whatever, but the listener will also understand that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, and here's the other beautiful thing is that in the middle of a show, you can, especially using StreamYard, I can turn you, put you on the screen, and I go change my headphones because I couldn't hear you.
Oh no.
Well, but it
sounded fantastic.
Yeah, I'm sure you did as I get my volume here set from my microphone. Well, Roger, that is a good spot for me to say, we're going to take a break. So folks, we are spending some time today with Roger Nairn of JAR Audio. What does JAR stand for?
Jen, Aaron, and Roger. And it's a great story. I'll tell it after the break.
All right, good. I love that. So we're going to hear about JAR Audio, Jen, Aaron, and Roger. I got the Roger part. Yeah. So we haven't met the other two.
Nope.
But let's get into that. In the meantime, Roger, where do you want people to go to find you?
Yeah, check out jaraudio.com. So that's jaraudio.com. Got all sorts of great blog topics on the podcast industry, specifically around companies and starting their own podcast.
Cool.
You can also check us out on LinkedIn, and we're also on Twitter.
Sweet. And I hear the Twitter feed is always fun. So folks, you always want to make sure you don't miss the Twitter feed. All right, Roger. Well, this has been a great conversation. Folks, we're going to take a break here. If you are listening to the podcast, you probably know this by now. We're going to this will be the end of part 1. Tune in next week and you'll be able to pick up part 2 of our conversation with Roger. But for those folks listening live, stay right where you are. We'll be right back. And Roger, don't go anywhere. We'll see you in just a moment. At ePresence, we have found that 86% of Americans want businesses to be more transparent than ever before. One of the best ways that you can be transparent is by using your social media. Use it to express those things that show that you are a genuine company and that you care. If you need help with that, we do that at ePresence. ePresence, social media solved. Welcome to How's Your ePresence? I am Mark Galvin, your host, and this show is produced by ePresence. We're so glad you're with us. This is part 2 of our conversation with Roger Nairn of JAR Audio. And I have had a great conversation already with him. We spent 30 minutes talking about podcasting. Let me give you a little hint of who he is. Just a quick highlight here. He's the co-founder and CEO of JAR Audio. He has worked with Netflix, Expedia, Walmart, Nordstrom's, Lamborghini. We didn't talk about Lamborghini in the first part of the show. We should do that. 4 Seasons Plus, Lululemon, which we found out. We had a great conversation about Lululemon. Did you know that the L is not capped on purpose? Curious about that? Go back and listen to part 1. He's also a board member with TEDxVancouver and lives in Vancouver. Absolutely wonderful part of the world. So folks, we would love for you wherever you're watching, if you're tuning in on YouTube or Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter, we'd love for you to follow or connect with us. So hit that follow button there on your screen. By following us, you get notified when we go live, and that means you can pop in and drop in a question. So as a matter of fact, we've got some questions coming up. I'll show you that. We'll put those up on the screen in just a moment here. But throw your questions at us. We would love for you to ask Roger your questions about podcasting. And with that, let's look in through. I think that's all I need to mention. Let's see if we can find Roger and bring him back. Hey, there he is.
Hi.
Roger,
good to see you.
Welcome back. So was that 5 minutes or was that 2 minutes? Because our producer said at the beginning of the show that, this little break actually takes a lot less than 5 minutes. I think it was 5, wasn't it?
It was in the minute and a half territory, like she said. Kenzie knew what she was talking about.
All right, Roger, I'll see you in 3 minutes. So for the rest of I'm just kidding. All right.
Yeah.
Well, that it seems like I cover a lot more content. Well, nonetheless, let's push on. I am really curious about the J and the A of JAR Audio. Tell me the story there.
Oh yeah, it's a great one, and this is a classic tale of. If there's anybody looking to start a business and are a bit unsure, here's my like great story about just starting. Like we had talked about, I was working in the advertising world. I had fallen in love with podcasts as a hobby. I had a couple of friends who we went out for a drink one night, started talking about business ideas that melded the advertising world, my experience in client service, along with my partner Jen, who came from the journalism space. She worked many years with CBC, which is sort of the Canadian version of NPR. And then Aaron, who came from the digital and traditional broadcast world. And we thought, how could we blend our experiences to create a company? And the company was based off of servicing companies and brands that want to get into the podcast space. However, I said to them, listen, guys, I've tried to start businesses in the past, and I'm a kind of a procrastinator. I would obsess over the business cards and try to make the font perfect. And the reality was I never actually launched a business. I was just screwing around because I was afraid. I was afraid of launching a business. So I said,
well, hey, listen, having a high tolerance of risk is part of starting your own business. Yeah.
So I said to them, listen, I'm not going to do this unless we just put the minimum viable product out in the world, see if there's any interest at all. And then we'll kind of like slowly build from there. But we have to start. And they said, great. I went home that night. Totally true story. Went home that night, went on LinkedIn, reached out to 8 people, kind of random, with like a little description of the business we were looking to start. I said, is this of any interest to you? The second person who responded happened to say, you'll never believe this, but my wife is looking for this exact service. Can you be in her office on Thursday? And it was Tuesday when I sent it out. Door. So this was Tuesday. He said, here's her details. I reached out to her. She said, great. We walked into their office. It turns out the company is Sage Natural Wellness. It's one of the world's largest aromatherapy brands and wellness brands. They have retail locations everywhere. They talked to us about podcasts. We talked to them about podcasts. They said, this sounds amazing. Send us your pricing.
Had you set up your pricing?
No, we went, okay. Yeah,
I love that.
And as we're leaving, they said, by the way, what's the name of the company? And my partner, Aaron, said, Jar Audio. And we kind of looked at him and he looked at us and we said, yeah, Jar Audio, and walked away. And we said, what does Jar Audio mean? He says, it's Jen, Aaron, and Roger. And we kind of went, okay, yeah. And as a kind of like an advertising and design guy, it kind of drives me a bit crazy that it's an acronym, acronyms.
That's good.
Sometimes it works, sometimes they don't, but it's stuck. And to be honest, that was our very first client. We figured out our pricing. We rolled with it. We developed a podcast with them over the course of 3 years. That was our very first ever project. And it literally has grown from that moment. So
that's so cool. I love that story. All those kind of stories I think are fun. It's always neat. And I really do mean it is neat to hear things like that. All right. I have a question from our listeners. And so Maria Lalo said, forgive me, Roger. She's very nice. Forgive me, Roger, if you've already mentioned this. Is there a magic time limit for podcasts? 20 to 30 minutes?
Yeah. So Maria,
or Joe Rogan's time, 2.5 hours. I'm ready to hear this too.
We like to always say when it comes to this, it depends. It depends on the listener. And so what we typically do is take an assessment or an audit of the other content being produced by the company or brand that we're working with. How long are their videos? How long is their blog? Is a blog post? Looking at some of the other content to determine kind of like how much, because we all know that there are some pieces of content coming from certain companies that are quite extensive, and you have no problem digging into a 45-page white paper. But then some needs to be a little bit snappy and quick. So we always say it depends. It depends on your audience. But typically we're in the 20 to 30 minute range. We've had some that are upwards of an hour. The Joe Rogan thing is incredibly rare. I would argue that not all of that is being listened to or watched. There's people skipping around and they're sharing, bits and pieces of the show versus somebody sitting down and listening to the entire thing. But it works for him. It clearly works for him. Yep. He's, incredibly successful of what he does. So it really, really depends on the audience and their expectations of length. The other thing too is, there's no rules when it comes to these sorts of things. So try an episode at 20 minutes, try an episode at 30 minutes, try an episode at 40, and then ask your audience, like, what do you think? And then, revise from there.
And you got metrics too, right? You can always
For
see
sure.
what the metrics say. People are paying more attention or engaging through listening to the entire show versus
Right.
only catching a little bit of it. I think that the question that I would have, kind of, tagging on to Maria's question, is there a data sweet spot that we're seeing that most people are willing to give a podcast 30 minutes? Like, here's an example. How long is a commute? And if somebody's going to drive 30 minutes, an average commute's 30 minutes, then they'll listen to a 30-minute podcast. And I'm going to tell you what, and I just totally to expose myself. It's one of the reasons why I want our podcast to be 30 minutes, because I want it to fit into a commute. Only the crazies are driving an hour and a half in a commute. Oh, wait a minute. Hopefully there's no crazies listening. But that is a long time to commute. So I would like for it to fit into that, that sweet spot of that drive time.
I definitely think you're onto something. I have not seen any data myself. However, that makes perfect sense to me, and is something that I would probably argue. Same with like a trip on the treadmill or a walk with your dog. The 30-minute range is a good sweet spot.
Good. So one of the ways that I started my podcasting with a local online radio station. So here in Atlanta is a group called Business Radio X.
Mm-hmm.
And Business Radio X has a studio. You walk in, you sit down, you set the microphone and all the activities around you. It's actually a great place to meet face to face. And that's where I started doing podcasts first. And it was nice because I was able to focus on the content, not the tech.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that phased into this. And the nice thing is, every once in a while, I get to hear from the owner of that radio station's Mike Salmon, and he's asking a question. So I love it that Mike's watching our show. So Mike's question is, can you compare the pros and cons of producing and distributing your podcast by yourself compared to using a professional podcast production house? And I wanted to mention Business Radio X because Mike's actually asking, so is it better to come see him, or should you try to do this on your own? And I am actually really curious on your thoughts on that too.
Well, I'll start by saying that I encourage everybody to at least start it on their own, but obviously we are biased and think you should come to a production house or agency.
Right.
It's honestly similar to working with an advertising agency or coming to ePresence. You could do LinkedIn on your own, and so your social on your own. However, there is obviously the expert angle. Plus, we treat all of our projects unique and bespoke, so we don't have a sort of product off the shelf, and so we come from it from a very much sort of an arm's length as well. So we're able to challenge our clients, bring them ideas that perhaps they would never have thought of themselves. We're also able to surface, everything from celebrity host and guests to finding the right marketing opportunities. We obviously know what we're doing and come from that sort of trusted advisor sort of angle of things. Plus, I like to call ourselves a do it all for you agency. We will handle everything from start to finish. But at the same time, allow you to lean in where you think you have certain levels of expertise. But most of our clients kind of give it to us to produce. They are obviously there for input and approvals, which, let's be honest, we are all so busy. We don't have time all the time to produce a podcast ourselves. So we are that solution when it comes to full production.
Yeah, I think so. I actually push people to go to Mike here in Atlanta frequently if they're thinking about it, because you can get in and figure out if it's a space you should be. I think the biggest struggle that people have today when they start their podcast is, what is their own voice, and trying to deal with all the other ancillary stuff that happens when you're doing a podcast. I'm going to tell you what, I just think it's hard.
Mm.
Being able to come in and just say, what is my message?
Mhm.
And am I going to interview people? Am I going to tell a story? Am I going to do something different? Like what we're planning on doing is switching over and doing web audits or social media audits, as it were. It allows you to focus on that. And I think the content is where the businesses should probably spend the most amount of their time to make sure it's quality if you want people to listen. Now, listen, I'm going to tell you something, Roger. I know this for a fact. There are people who do podcasts not because they want listeners. They
Mhm.
do it because it helps them develop a relationship with potentially key clients.
For
That's
sure.
not a bad idea either.
Nope.
And so they're not focused necessarily on content as much, right? They're focused on it's a vehicle to
Mhm.
get a potential prospect in front of them. And that's not a bad idea either.
Nope.
I'm guessing though, your clients, if they're paying you to produce it, they're looking for a different type of return. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, they're looking for that quality and performance that you're going to get from a professional agency. Again, I equate it to, and we built. I mean, honestly, our business model is built off of creative agencies. You come to them because they're world class and have a track record of projects they've worked on that have shown success. And there's some great case studies to point them to.
Right.
The other thing too is because it's a branded show. Doesn't mean it has to be an ad. It can't be an ad. Nobody's going to listen to
No.
a 20 or 30 minute, barfing up about your
Yeah.
your products and your people and your brand and all that sort of stuff.
I
They
love
just
the old
won't.
quote.
And our data shows that is that the second we start talking too much about the client and the brand, we see drop off.
Yeah.
And so us being that presence to just remind them of that
Yeah.
is
good.
huge. The other thing too is like we'll work with some of the world's largest organizations, and a podcast, because it's relatively new and because everybody kind of wants to have their fingers in it, it can be quite challenging at times to get it navigated through an organization. And
Right.
so it's nice to have a third party who's leading it versus so-and-so from the marketing team who's spearheading this, and they're just gonna they and this is what we're being told, is that we're incredibly helpful when it comes to making it a reality through the legal, marketing,
that's
all
huge.
those angles. Yeah, I mean, we're working with everything from contracts to making media purchases, and that can sometimes be sticky coming from the in-house team. So just being that
just the how do you do that?
for
Right?
sure. Yeah.
I think it's very interesting. All right, good stuff. And Mike and Maria, thank you so much for your questions.
You.
We appreciate that. So if you're watching, wherever you're watching, we are talking to Roger Nairn, and I keep questioning, am I saying your last name right? Nairn?
You are. I would have corrected you otherwise.
So it's Nairn.
Very nasally.
Oh, yeah, Nairn.
Nairn.
No, I mean, there is no other way to say that, right? Nairn. It's
a little town in Scotland.
Oh, is that where the name comes from?
Mm-hmm.
Really? Oh, he's a little bit of Scottish.
And I remember when I was a kid, I might have been like 3 or maybe 5 years old. My grandma pulling out the Guinness Book of World Records, and there was a period of time where the name Nairn was in there as like the third oldest name in the world, and I think it's since not, but because it means like by a body of water or something like that.
Oh, yeah. I like that.
Yeah,
that's a good story. So here we are. We're talking to Roger Nairn with Jar Audio about podcasting. If you have a question that you're tuning on whatever channel you are, feel free to throw it right there into the chat box. And as you just saw from Maria and Mike, we would be happy to see if we can stump Roger with one of these. So format, we talked a lot about format. What should your podcast, what's that format? And you mentioned some of the great ones, which are storytelling. And I think that there are some, it seems like it'd be a lot of fun to do a story on a podcast, right? Man, is that a lot of work or what?
I'm not going to lie. It is. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's like the fiction side of storytelling, but then there's the nonfiction side of storytelling. And I actually think that you can tell really great stories without as much sort of heavy lifting as maybe some like a fiction based podcast where you've got to find actors and sound and music, and like we can take a regular sort of topic and weave in some some interesting storytelling techniques to give the listener take the listener on an emotional journey. I mean, the great thing about podcasts is it's such an intimate medium. So if we can fold in, we always like to say, like, we don't want to talk about the factory. We want to also hear the factory.
Right.
So if you can incorporate some really great, sound, not just sound effects, but real live tape of whatever's going on as the story's being told, you really get that sense of place and being there. Same goes with, we can do the one-on-one interview like this, but perhaps we're weaving in some cuts of me on my phone at home, sort of rehashing and thinking about our interview, and talking about sort of what I think went well or didn't go well, and then you can incorporate that into the episode. There's a number of things you can be doing to enhance the audio experience that don't have to be too production heavy.
Yeah, and I mentioned the production heavy part because I don't think anyone who does a podcast doesn't listen to podcasts, right? So I listen to podcasts like crazy. In fact, it's on a normal bend, and and when I listen to them, I do pay attention to a lot of the nuances of what is going on, right? I think, gosh, they put a lot of work into that. And so here's an example, and I'm going to do a screen share here. So this is a good example of a show that is that I really like. Tim Hartford is an author. He does these things called cautionary tales. He's British. He has a really cool way of sharing a story. And I'm going to tell you what, you can tell they work really hard on that show to put that together. And there's probably, and he writes the whole thing from soup to nuts. I think telling a story while it's a great idea, you just got to be ready for it, right? You have to be storyteller. You got to have some experience at that. And maybe like I mentioned with Tim Hartford, that's what he does. He's a story guy. So be ready if that's what you want to do. And there's also the other thing that I think is interesting. Some people will do this type of interview and then post-produce the crap out of it, where they're grabbing pieces like you and I, they didn't like the jokes we were telling, so they get rid of that part, and maybe they split the beginning story, how you and I were talking about Vancouver into two parts. So there's a lot of post-production that can be done also with these interviews. You mentioned, we talked about Joe Rogan and the listener. So his shows are sometimes 2.5 hours long, and his average listener per week is an hour and a half. Well, that sounds fine for a 2.5 hour show, but folks, he's dropping one every day. Every day he's doing a show. So, he's getting an hour and a half, but he's dropping, gosh, what is that? 10 plus hours a week of content. Now, some of that may be recycled.
I would also say that his format is very much based on just getting somebody in the room and having a conversation with them. And we both know that is a lot easier to work with than something that is, a little bit more maybe scripted or having multiple voices. I will say that it's a lot easier to just, have him turn on the camera and start recording and then just see where the conversation goes.
Right.
I'm sure he's doing his homework in advance. I don't think he doesn't know what, the conversation's going to lead to, especially with some of some of his guests that are coming from interesting backgrounds and things like that. But
I think that's part of the attraction, right? He gets really controversial clients, guests.
Yeah.
He gets a lot of very interesting people in there, and those folks it's half the draw, but they're famous people or such, which is always, that's going to draw its own set of set of listeners by themselves, but they're not going to
Mhm.
be loyal listeners all the time. And I think that's what's more important for a show.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's very little that ties his episodes together.
Right.
And so I would treat his show like walking into a library and picking out the books that you're interested in reading versus the entire anthology.
Which,
Um,
hey, listen, I think that's a good idea because
mhm.
and frankly, I've listened to Joe Rogan plenty, but I typically am going through just like you said. I'll go back
Yeah,
and look for a show. So some newsmaker there'll be some news about his shows, and he's typically stirring stuff up, which I think is great for
totally.
his show, frankly.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I'll go back in and catch a show like that. Absolutely.
Yeah, but very few. I would. Yeah, I guess that very few of his listeners are listening to every single episode. There
I
are probably
agree with that.
a lot. I mean, he obviously has a big audience and enough downloads to assume that some are,
Mhm.
but they're also it's kind of more of a smorgasbord,
I
picking
agree.
out the bits and pieces you want to listen to.
Yeah, I totally agree. So the point is, lots of options, a lot of different ways you can do a show. Telling a story, I think, is interesting. But it's going to take a lot more of your time. And if you're running a business,
Hmm.
good luck with that.
Hire an agency.
There you go. There you go. Well, that is a great transition.
Yeah.
Where can people track you down, Roger?
Yeah, so they can go to jaraudio.com. So that's JAR audio.com. They can also check us out on LinkedIn and on Twitter.
Awesome. Well, Roger, this has been a great conversation. I love this. I could sit and talk about podcasts all day long. Not sure if you enjoy a bourbon at all, but you'd be the kind of guy I'd hit at the bar and we would start talking podcasts and I would tease out the most boring minutia stuff ever in a conversation with you. And I would love it, but it wouldn't be good for a podcast. People would get a little bored.
I don't know. I think a conversation about podcasting over bourbon would be pretty interesting.
Hey, listen, I have never, ever had a conversation over bourbon that wasn't fun.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, totally.
I don't know what it is. Something happens,
It's the
right? The
alcohol.
brain changes. I don't know.
It's the
All
warmth
right.
and the alcohol.
That's exactly right. Well, Roger, hey man, thank you so much for
Absolutely.
joining us to talk about podcasts. I learned a ton. And I hopefully our guests have. And if you're tuning in to this part of the show and you didn't catch part one, go back and catch part one. If you're watching the stream on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or Twitter, when we click finish today, you'll be able to go replay this. We'd love for you to share this with any of your friends. In fact, Benita Samuels was catching the show for one of her clients. Well, Benita, and you know this, she's a LinkedIn guru. She'll be able to share it right on LinkedIn with any of her clients. And maybe you guys could give Roger a buzz and he can help you execute your podcast.
Happy to.
Roger, thanks, man. I appreciate the time. When I'm in Vancouver, which I hope is soon, I will give you a call and you and I will go fishing.
Man, we got bourbon up here too.
And we'll have a bourbon. Actually, may have a couple of bourbons then.
Or maybe like a cedar plank soaked in bourbon with some salmon on it.
Wait. Hold on a second. So I had cedar plank this weekend with salmon. Soaking it in bourbon is a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
Actually, gosh, I don't know if I would want to lose that much bourbon. How do you do you have a little tray with, for the...
It could be like a mid-tier bourbon.
Oh, that's brilliant. Oh my God,
Yeah.
I got to write that one down. Hey, Mackenzie, make sure that ends up in the show notes. Okay. There we go. I got a thumbs up from the off screen. Roger, I'm going to talk to you way too long. Don't go anywhere. We got a little post show wrap up that we want to chat with you about, but I love that you joined us today. It was a great conversation. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark.
For the rest of you folks, we're so glad that you joined us here on How's Your ePresence. As you know, our show is produced by ePresence. We're a full-service social media agency. You can catch us at epresence.me. That's epresence.me because it's all about you. We will manage your company's social media. Our favorite clients are the ones that are your chief marketing officer. You're trying to figure out how you run social media for your company. You don't want to hire somebody to do social. Like, oh, how do I do this? Well, just give us a call. We'll take that for you. You just give us your content. We'll have conversations with you. We'll make your social media sing. Then let's say you need the CEO's social media to get active. We do that too. We'll go in and we'll get their personal LinkedIn account rolling and do that all on your behalf. by listening or watching this show, you get a discount. If you go to e-pr.me/listener, I'm going to say that again, e-pr.me/listener, go there, fill out the form there. We'll give you a 5% discount on all of our services. ePresence is everywhere. We are on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So we stream live all of our shows there. You can also find us on any of your podcast apps. In fact, I just added some new podcast apps recently. We'd love for you to subscribe. So wherever you are, hit that subscribe button. It's somewhere. There you go. Wait a minute, on that side. Hit that subscribe button so that you know when we go live. So just like Mike, Maria, and Benita, you can participate in our show. Let's see. Where are we? Oh, our in-house producer is Mackenzie Munzer. We love the work that she does. Thank you so much, Mackenzie. You are awesome. Until next time, for our guest, Roger Nairn, I am Mark Galvin. Thank you for watching How's Your ePresence?